right, welcome back, everybody. We are in Verdict Watch in the Scott Nelson case out of Florida. It is a death penalty case, numerous charges against the defendant. And you can see what looks like a bar association convention there at the bench. There are 7 attorneys involved, 3 on the pros side, 4 on the defense side. And they are going over the most recent question from this jury. Okay, before we go back to the Nelson case, I do believe the jury seems to be queuing up. They're coming back into the courtroom. Again, they've asked a question regarding intent. And so what happened was that note went to the judge. The note was given to the prosecution and defense. They all huddled, basically trying to come up with an answer that everybody could agree with. And now as the jury's coming back into the courtroom, I don't know that we've got any audio, don't know if anything's happening just yet, but we anticipate the court will answer that question. Again, the question, please define intent and when intent has to occur. That's pretty ominous there. What do you think? It
is. And one thing a judge doesn't want to get into is a back and forth with the jury. Jurors are allowed to ask questions and find out.
Let's find out. Let's go into the courtroom. So there you have it, folks. A clean sweep for the prosecution, despite the many jury questions focusing on intent and some of the testimony of the defendant. Guilty of first-degree murder, guilty of felony murder, guilty of kidnapping, guilty of carjacking, and guilty of robbery. John Phillips is with me here. Surprised? A delay in what you expected?
I'm not surprised. It just took a little longer. And again, when you have cameras in the courtroom, jurors always take their job seriously, but they get to be reported that they took their job seriously too. So it took a little bit longer. And I have had this happen one other time where I had a question pending and a verdict came out and we all kind of looked at each other like, should we answer their question? Like, no, it's done.
We were going back in there. We thought to get the answer to their last question, but obviously they resolved whatever it was and went right on to the verdict. So you're saying, and this is interesting to me, you're saying that because of the cameras, that the jury consciously, they may not discuss it, but consciously they think, we're on our best behavior here. We can't hide what we're doing. If we come out with too quick a verdict, people are going to say, hey, what's the deal? Didn't you look at the case?
High-profile cases, and we represent Omarosa. I've gotten so many lawyers that have told me they'd come help out for free.
How's that going for you?
We'll talk about that later. She's got another lawsuit dropped on her, but when cameras are in the courtroom, when something's high-profile, it affects everybody, and again, I'm for it. I'm not anti-cameras in the courtroom in any way, but it is a secondary gain and psychological effect that just does weigh in.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Well, we're learning now that this is what I would call a Friday verdict. Sometimes they're going, okay, look, it's 4 o'clock Friday afternoon. Anybody want to stay here for the weekend? Unless they're really torn on something, this is not unusual to get a verdict late in a Friday afternoon. We're hearing the penalty phase will begin bright and early Monday morning at 9 o'clock, and obviously we will have that for you right here on the Law and Crime Network. Again, Scott Nelson in the Florida case of the murder of Jennifer Fulford, found guilty across the board, first-degree murder, felony murder, kidnapping, carjacking, robbery, and now, of course, it is a death penalty case. So the jury thinks they're done, but no, they've got maybe even a bigger decision to make. And again, the penalty phase will begin on Monday at 9 o'clock. Let's take a break. We'll come back for more right here on the Law and Crime Network. So there you have it. That is the guilty verdict against Scott Nelson on all counts. Now we look toward the death penalty phase. John Phillips is with me here. You got to poll the jury, right?
You do. Every time. You kind of know who loses because, sometimes the attorney can ask for the jury to be polled. She polled it immediately because it was a death penalty case.
Of course. So now we're going forward with the penalty portion of the trial. That will begin Monday at 9 a.m. And now, if you think his testimony was interesting in the guilt phase, he has already promised in one of his letters that he was going to testify in both phases,
right,
as if he had some precognition that, hey, I'm going down for this, but I'm going to have my say twice.
Right.
In the penalty phase, it's no holds barred. I mean, we're going to hear stories. I don't know about the mitigation, but we're going to hear a lot of aggravation. Simple things like, hey, yeah, I conked my dad on the head once, forced him to rob a bank for me and get 10 grand. Of course, I did about 10, 15 years for that. How crazy could this get?
It could get pretty crazy. And I'm watching the monitor, and as a criminal defense lawyer, that's the one scene you never want to happen.
Chains applied.
When
yes,
when the orange or green or whatever color the officers are, surround you and put body chains on you. But yeah, it's going to be a wild phase 2. because, like you said, there's the rules of evidence. There's still rules that apply, but this is mitigation, and so it's not guilt or innocence. It's saved my life, and so he gets to go a lot further off that ledge.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear what, if any, mitigating factors the defense comes up with. Knowing what we know, what's your best guess? What do they got to work with?
It's hard to predict because whatever the lawyer says may not be what actually happens. He's clearly scripted this, and if there's something in his mind that thinks he could be that TV villain, that he could be the Casey Anthony or whoever, I don't even want to give him time.
Right.
He may have something in store to try to pull the national cameras in.
Here's what I think he's going to do, and he's given us a bit of a little sneak peek. He's going to rip the system. He's going to blast everybody who's ever done anything in his mind wrong to him that led to create, well, he called himself an animal. And I think he's just going to give us a whole bunch more of that. And I don't think his attorneys have a whole lot of control over that.
I don't think they do either. And he's got to, so he's scripted this again, and he's got to do that. This is his sanity, I think, for him to make a difference and expose the criminal justice system. And anybody that works in it knows it's flawed, knows there's great issues in it. But
he's Don Quixote in his mind.
He is.
He's tilting at this windmill.
Yeah.
Let's listen to some of this amazing testimony from the defendant. Again, Scott Nelson found guilty on all counts, facing the death penalty, but here he is in his own testimony. Okay, well, there he is, Scott Nelson in all of his glory. And as I've told John Phillips, my guest here, that may be just a sneak peek of what we're going to see next week when we begin the penalty phase. This man now found guilty of first-degree murder, etc., and the death penalty is on the table. So, John, this guy's got a weekend to think it up, work on his script, to come up with everything that's possibly affected his life and turned him into the animal that he says he is.
And the poor people of Winter Park, they better be ready because they're going to get annihilated.
They're going to get blasted for being rich.
Exactly. I've been to Winter Park. It's a great
Beautiful,
little
right?
area. It is,
Okay.
and a little suburb of Orlando. We're at the point where it's a death penalty phase. He gets his day in court. He gets one more, bite at the apple, so to speak. But I have a feeling all of that will backfire.
Yeah, we're going to find out. You make an important point, though, because I have a thing about the mapping of all these different places, because people just don't, you're in Jacksonville,
right.
You have a better idea. So here's some very expensive graphics just to give you a sense of where everything is. So you have Orlando here, Winter Park just northeast, correct?
Yep.
And then south of that, you have Disneyland, about 35 miles. And then the body was found just north of that, just about half an hour north of that in this area. How do you pronounce that? Apopka, Finland?
yeah.
So there's a lake over there, right? Is that right?
I'm going to give this Floridian approved.
And then, of course, you go due north, and you find the Law&Crime studios and me right there.
And you're finding me flying back down there
Yes,
tomorrow.
That's right. I'll have to add that later. But it's important for the geography of this case to see what this guy was doing. The murder was actually further away from the home and north of Disney, and she was basically in the car being dragged around the whole time,
right,
not knowing what the hell was going to happen to her.
This was a morose, there wasn't anything accidental, or this wasn't just a mere property crime. This is I'm not even a very pro death penalty guy, but on ones like this,
if you were, this
you can understand why it exists.
And the kidnapping had a terrorist and terrorism kind of enhancement, and now you know why. He's calling her all the way around, not knowing what's going to happen to her. That is terrorizing.
Gosh, just imagine.
Let's go back into the courtroom now for more from our favorite defendant, Scott. We got to find out. I have to admit, I'm not sure what the whole operation deal is, what it was, what the first one was that he described as botched, and what Scott Nelson needs for $30,000 as a secondary operation. But I'm on it. I'm going to find out because it's driving me crazy. John Phillips, again, we're hearing him blaming everybody, not my fault. And yet the jury didn't bite as quickly as we thought they might have. So, and we've talked about this, but it seems to me they had to be looking for something and then didn't find it. So it's not like they said, oh, I wonder if he's guilty. It seemed to me it was like, we know he's guilty, but let's look harder to make sure we're not missing something.
Right. Jurors in these cases are aware that this is a death penalty or at least a life in prison type case, and they're going to take it seriously. I think anything they could have found, the big what if here, it's enormous, is what happens if he keeps his mouth shut? What happens if the Fifth Amendment, that big one, protects him instead of is his sword and shield? Would it have taken longer?
Would he be less despicable? The things that he said in that confession were pretty outrageous. He would not have had the chance to explain those by saying, hey, I was just kind of elaborating to give the detectives their jollies. That wasn't true. So they would have been taking that confession on its face value. I don't know. Maybe that would have been worse. I don't know. I can't tell. It's a hodgepodge of evil here.
But on direct, they really didn't even get into the confession. And so
he kept getting into it, saying, I'm kind of vague on that point. Why don't you just look at the confession and fill in the blanks?
I have a feeling, it's one of those get your popcorn ready for Monday, because it's going to be both sickening and compelling for people that are kind of into this world and watch these trials.
It is fascinating from the judicial level, from just the basic legal level, from a psychological level for every armchair shrink that's out there. This is one of these cases where you sit back and go, I thought my life was a little rough, but I'm fine. I'm doing great. We're going to listen to some of the foundational testimony that got us to the point we are today. And again, Scott Nelson found guilty on all charges. Remember, at one point, he was talking about being in the home with Jennifer Fulford, and she was supposed to get a visit from a lady to hang some art. And he made Jennifer call this woman and tell her not to come. Obviously, would have busted up his little party there. So this is the testimony of Janet Grimm. That is now convicted murderer Scott Nelson, as indignant as ever there in that back and forth with the prosecution. John Phillips is with me here. A couple of things stand out to me, in retrospect as we're reviewing a guilty verdict. First of all, he talks about being in the house for 4 hours. What the heck's he doing in the house for 4 hours?
That's a question. And he was coming off being homeless. Was he showering? Was he just trying to pretend? None of it makes a lot of sense, but given this guy, given Scott Nelson, you don't expect everything to be logical, but that's a ton of time.
And do you believe that he went upstairs and left Miss Fulford alone downstairs, not bound, not in any way restrained, just because he said, don't go upstairs, I'm going to go up there? That's ridiculous.
Not only do I not believe it, but as you said, the jury that convicted him of murder didn't believe it either.
Yeah. And so you have, in theory, them in the house for 4 hours while he's knocking about trying to find money, because he has said that's the sole purpose, just wanted to find money, and didn't find much. What he ends up with is her ATM card. A failed burglary robbery in the big scheme of things.
Right.
A failure. Okay. Linda Drain Burdick, no doubt having to control herself to keep from just going off with all of the material she had to work with there. John Phillips with me, trial attorney from Jacksonville, Florida. What's going on down there in Florida?
Well, I'm glad we got rid of this guy. Florida, we're sponsoring Florida Man Night at a minor league baseball team because Florida Man. Here we go again with Florida getting a bad name.
Yeah, what's wrong with that? The weather's so nice. What's going on down there? Okay, so we hear this guy go on and on and on, and we expect to hear him in the penalty phase doing exactly the same thing. Do you really believe that what he did he thinks was okay, that he really believes that it was poor him, he's been put upon by the system, or that is that just an act?
The best actors convince themselves, and so clearly he's convinced himself that it's the world against him, from everything from medical malpractice to probation to him losing his job to daddy issues, and you can have real reasons, but if you aren't able to justify, they're just excuses. And I think that's all the jury heard was excuse, and inconsistency. And there's just I said it in the beginning, I'll say it again, there's nothing likable about it.
Should the defense use some sort of insanity analysis here, put on some experts, put on some of his background, give the jury something to hold on to there to say, yeah, the guy's crazy, we can see that in our own way, but that's not legally insane? Maybe they should have.
I mean, the last two cases I've covered with Law and Crime have been insanity cases, and you'd almost expect it because this fit that mold, except I don't think Scott would have allowed that. He wanted to be smart. He wanted to be brilliant.
Right.
He wanted to
I'm not
outsmart
insane.
the system.
No. I'm not the crazy person.
Right.
I'm crazy smart.
Right.
Okay.
I'm the victim. Yeah.
I can see that. Okay. And again, no client control of any kind with this particular case and this defense team. Let's listen to more now of those closing arguments from today. Okay. Picture this. You're 5 months pregnant. Use your imagination here, guys. You're 5 months pregnant. You're driving through a parking lot of your local Dollar General. You look out. You see a woman you work with, another young woman. You're in your 20s, so is she, and you have some sort of altercation. You get out of the car. You go confront her. Your friends are in the car. They approach her as well. The woman you approach pulls out a gun. You're 5 months pregnant. She pulls out a gun, feeling threatened. She shoots at the ground to warn everybody. It ricochets off the ground, hits you in the abdomen. You survive, the child dies. The 5-month-old fetus dies. You are now charged, you, the mother who had the child inside, you're now charged with manslaughter. That's what's going on in Alabama in the case against Marsha Jones. There she is. This is very interesting procedurally, ethically, politically, on all fronts. And I have just the folks to talk about this here. Not only do I have John Phillips in the studio, but I have Judge Ashley Wilcott with us as well. Judge, how are you?
Good. Thank you for having me, Michael.
You bet. Well, you've seen the details on this case. Give me your thoughts.
Okay, first of all, let me add to the scenario you just laid out perfectly, and that is before, when you're 5 months pregnant, change that scenario into you are the instigator, you are the aggressor, and you decide to get in an altercation with another woman, and it's over the father of the fetus. It doesn't matter what it's over. You choose at 5 months pregnant to jump out of your car, to be the aggressor, to start a fight, to continue the fight, and as that other person tries to drive away, you continue to be the aggressor, causing the other person to pull a gun. Those are the facts laid out in terms of what's being reported in this case. And yes, that mother who's lost her child, her fetus, her 5-month-old, is now being charged with manslaughter.
Yeah, and that is, we saw the photo there of Ebony Jemison. She's 23 years old. She is, I guess, effectively the other woman. Let me ask you this, John. There was an indictment process that failed just a few weeks ago. I think it was on the 10th of June, no indictment. And now here we are 16 days later. Oh, hey, there's an indictment. What do you think happened?
Stand your ground. Alabama is a big defensive gun use state. I grew up there, went to law school there. And I'm sure that somehow it was the defense of the non-aggressor, but I don't really like charging her here.
Let me ask you this, Judge, because where's this going to go logically? I'm driving my car. I have a little fender bender. My fault. I'm pregnant. My fault. As a result, the child miscarries. Manslaughter against me now?
Well, I think if you look at the exact strict wording of the statute, potentially the scenario you just laid out, Michael, could be manslaughter. So there is some caution, the slippery slope. I think that that's going to be the issue. But keep in mind, I think at least 38 states have what we call the fetal homicide laws, right, which allow for criminal charge as a result of the death of an unborn fetus. So that's in keeping in line with that they're pursuing this charge, in my opinion.
Last word on this, John. What do you think? Is this going to go the distance? Is there going to be a conviction here?
I don't. We once had a case where a guy literally shot off his own penis and wasn't supposed to have a firearm. And we convinced prosecutors, look, we get it. We get why you charged him. But he's paid enough. He's paid the price, and I hope they do that.
Well, nothing like ending the week on a penis story. Thank you, John, for dropping that by. Okay, so that's going to do it. John Phillips, thank you so much for being here. And, of course, Judge Ashley, always good to see you. Nice to see you again. Thank you. That's going to do it for me. And stand by. The Daily Debrief is coming up. We have Aaron Keller with all the latest coast to coast, gavel to gavel. Stay right where you are. This is the Law and Crime Network. Good to see you. Have a great weekend.